Welcome to Wavelengths, a podcast with Amphenol Broadband Solutions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast, where we dig into the timeliest topics, tech, trends, you name it, impacting the larger telecom and broadband industries. We appreciate you all joining us here for another episode of the podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and it's a pleasure getting back in the hot seat. It's been a little bit since our last interview, and so we've got some great insights to share today. We're going to be connecting the larger worlds of agriculture equipment, more specifically precision ag and network-supported ag technology, and the larger proliferation of rural broadband technology and infrastructure that we've been seeing, obviously for the last several years, but that now is getting finally a lot of renewed focus, energy, and funds to execute in 2024. So again, folks, thanks for joining us. Looking forward to the conversation today. Make sure that before you dig into the rest of the episode, you head to our website for more episodes and subscribe to Wavelengths on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for obviously previous episodes and to make sure you don't miss out on any future conversations. All right. Let's jump in. Again, for today, we're going to be exploring the fascinating world and innovations around AgTech, and more specifically, the transformative potential that comes with the expansion of rural broadband and how that can support a lot of the nascent energy around digitalizing and bringing Industry 4.0 to agriculture. This is obviously not new. We've already seen a lot of these technologies deployed, but seeing them at scale, seeing them across the wide gamut of potential agricultural applications, specifically to do with size too, whether we're talking about a factory farm or a small family-owned business of a farm, right? The potential is still sky high. And so we're hoping this podcast can illuminate a little bit of the progress we've already seen in terms of ag tech in the industry, but more specifically, how rural broadband expansion is going to support this next phase and where there's still some work to be done. So let's go ahead and dive in and introduce our guest. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Curt Blade. He's SVP at AEM, which is the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. Curt, great to have you on, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure getting to pick your brain and source your insights today as we talk ag tech, rural broadband, and again, a lot of that nascent and latent potential that is yet to be captured and realized. Hopefully we can shed some light on it and craft some action plans and strategies today. So it's going to be a good one. I want to start, Curt, if you don't mind giving our audience a brief elevator pitch. We'll keep it nice and short just to, give them the context, but I would love for you to explain a little bit more about your background and experience in the space and how that's going to color your perspectives and analysis on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Well, so first let me introduce the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. So we're the off-road trade association for ag, construction, forestry, mining, and utilities. So if your listeners are familiar with some of our storied brands like John Deere, Caterpillar, Case, you've seen bulldozers, you've seen tractors, you've seen combines. That's we're the trade association that represents those groups, as well as the technology arms that are both inside of those organizations, as well as and that would also serve the farming industry as a whole. So we're kind of right in the center of all these things that you mentioned in your introduction. And then for me personally, I'm a farm kid. I'm a farm kid from Missouri, and my family still farms. We've been farming a little over a century now, corn, soybeans in Missouri, and so I've seen firsthand this precision ag technology and what it can mean to a farming operation. I've also seen firsthand what happens when it doesn't work well because the broadband is not where it needs to be. So kind of bring an interesting perspective maybe to this conversation today.
Absolutely. Well, hey, love hearing you're a Missouri guy. I am myself, though, kind of by accident. I'm a Mizzou grad, so M-I-Z, baby.
ZOU, you bet.
Yes, there it is. Journalism major, obviously. So
I could tell you were brilliant, Daniel, when we first met. I didn't even realize that you're a Mizzou grad. I could just tell. So there we go.
it's in our blood, you know. It's they do a transfusion when we start, and then it just kind of emanates off of us like a radioactive, you know, isotope or something. Anyways, let's jump in, man. Thank you again for the context there, and I'm looking forward to getting your perspectives here. So to start at a high level, I want to get a pulse check on this development of AgTech as a layer of agricultural production. How would you say Industry 4.0 and the mass digitalization of industry at large is impacting the agricultural sector today, right? Where is it having the most tangible impacts on operations, output, oversight, quality, you name it? Just give us that pulse check really on how we're seeing Industry 4.0 today manifesting in agricultural production.
Well, actually, I'm gonna respond slightly differently because the answer is all of the above. All the questions you said, it's affecting everything that's happening within agriculture. But I would also say that if agriculture has kind of been at the forefront of technology for the last 30 years, with precision agriculture and using GPS to drive tractors, we've been doing this for 35 years, and when we talk about big data, and big data gets talked about how it applies to different industries, man, agriculture has been at it for a long time. So if you refer to it as Industry 4.0, I mean, we've kind of already been there within agriculture for some time. The amounts of data that is collected as a tractor drives through a field or as a harvester drives through the field is very real. What's different today versus what it was not too long ago is now it's all connected. It was at one time sort of would exist on the edge in that harvester and that tractor, and then it would have to go back to the field or farm to make some decisions and then apply those decisions next year. The difference that it's happening now because of advanced technology, because of interconnectivity, because of all of the way data is being transferred, just like every other industry, it's now real time. It's now opening up, the ability to do things, tap into that vast knowledge of artificial intelligence or constant amounts of data that are available and respond to it in real time. That's what the big difference is with agriculture today, much like other industries. But the difference with agriculture is that data set is very, very, very rich.
And, I think that's what's exciting about some of the nascent opportunities, again, with the development of rural broadband infrastructure is that, we're already seeing this Industry 4.0 development reach almost every slice of agricultural production. And yet there's still so much unrealized opportunity in terms of maximizing the data that's now captured at the edge, a lot of these, agricultural practices, to better inform production, to be more efficient at quality, to identify risk more proactively, et cetera. So what I want to do now is actually kind of go over some of those most exciting agricultural technologies that we see on the market today. I have some buckets here that I can get into and some specific examples, but I just want to ask the question more generally for you first. What would you say are some of the most exciting ag tech developments and innovations on the market today? And how would you say they're reshaping U.S. agricultural production?
Well, I think when you talk about production and technology in agriculture, I mean, there's transformational technologies, or, back when I was in the startup world in the 90s, we would say, what's the killer app? What's the one thing that changes and affects everything else? And in agriculture and precision farming, the killer app was a tractor that could drive itself in a straight line. When that GPS technology came into play, it all of a sudden opened up everything else. So when a tractor knows where itself is in the field, you can all of a sudden just begin to pile more and more and more things on top of that. So, so when you talk about transformational technology, that certainly is number one. Tractor knowing where itself is in the field, or any sort of a piece of equipment knowing where itself is in the field. So that's number one. And then when you look at the stuff that is kind of generative as a result of all of this, when you begin to say that artificial intelligence and optics being able to identify a weed or a pest or a crop or what is good and what is bad, and being able to act on that immediately, whether it's with a pesticide or a mechanical tillage of some sort, that is transformational. That's transformational from an operational efficiency to the individual farmer. It's transformational as it relates to the amount of inputs or the types of inputs that we're putting onto the farm. It's transformational from a sustainability story, from being able to know what we're doing with that individual acre, with that individual plant, with that individual output. It's pretty amazing. I remember hearing, I grew up on a farm. I mentioned it, farm for over 100 years. And part of why there's so many farmers that have been in business for that long is because, that generational knowledge gets passed on. We did it this way because grandpa did it this way, and his dad did it this way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's the institutional knowledge that was passed along. What we have now is not just the institutional knowledge, but actual real data that we can back that up with and make concrete decisions. And then instead of making a decision for an entire, 100 acre field of corn, we can make decisions for each one of those plants because we know the data about each one of those individual plants. And that's powerful.
I mean, it's almost unimaginable to think about how much more efficient and sustainable agricultural production can get when you have that level of granular per plant insight that, you might be able to have with the right kind of staffing and constant daily oversight otherwise. But talk about, the inefficient manual version of trying to do that, right? And so I agree. I think precision agriculture solutions, I think the layer of data analytics that's coming with solutions that, again, give field analysis, fleet monitoring, analytics to improve crop yield and reduce costs. That stuff is powerful. I'm curious if you can expand on any of the sort of downstream effects that you've already seen from precision ag and data analytics integrated into agricultural production. How is it creating those wins that you start to see, in a protracted fashion, 1 year after implementation, 5 years after implementation? Where are we starting to see some of those dubs?
Well, I give you the real simple one. First of all, farmers invest in precision agriculture because it makes sense for their business. It makes sense for their bottom line. A farmer immediately gets the idea of a tractor driving in a straight line that I don't have to worry about because it's less fatigue. You tell any farmer that adopts that technology, they get it right away. And then they quickly recognize, oh, now that my tractor's driving in a straight line, what else can I do off of it? So when we look at the kind of the benefits, the societal benefits, we did a really interesting bit of research, a couple of different studies that we've done that tried to point to the environmental benefits of precision agriculture. And that was sort of the truism that came out. Farmers don't buy precision agriculture because they're saving the world. They're buying it because it's making their business better. It just so happens that they're also saving the world at the same time. One of the surprises that came out of this precision ag study was the fuel savings. It just goes without saying that a tractor that drives in a straight line and doesn't overlap is going to save less fuel. That's just logic, right? We tried to quantify what that was, and we came up to some numbers that actually made pretty decent sense. But the bigger savings of precision agriculture in the data from a fuel standpoint is literally just the knowledge of the fuel usage. The amount of time that's spent idling burns fuel. The amount of time that's spent, while you're on the taking a break, filling up, grabbing lunch or something like that, keeping your tractor running so the air conditioner is running in the cab, a lot of fuel. And that knowledge, when we put that knowledge in front of farmers' hands, we're recognizing, we're hearing over and over again, when I know what that fuel burn is, and to know that diesel fuel is costing me about $5 a gallon right now, I turn it off. That saves me money, but man, if we're talking about CO2 emissions, that also has a dramatic impact. So that's a very tangible one that we can point to, is just the whole knowledge is power. But the other thing that you can point to is that we've got some studies that point to the amount of cars that have been taken off the road because of that fuel savings, or the amount of water that's been taken out of either irrigation or applied differently because of precision agriculture. But all those things sort of vary by field. It does come down to an individual farmer. The thing I can point to just unequivocally every time is that the more the farmer knows about their field, the more they know about their operation, they immediately make changes that make good economic sense. And typically, when they're making good economic decisions, they also tend to have societal benefits like less active ingredients and less runoff and better use of water.
And what also comes to mind is some of the exciting ways that those analytics layers are interacting with in real time other great ag tech innovations. For example, aerial imaging and topographic mapping, where you have drones or aerial imaging technology providing insights on crops and farm yields, helping identify, let's say, potential diseases or pests, right, before they become a widespread issue. This also brings to mind robotics. I mean, we've seen John Deere's launch of their smart tractors, already start to see some really powerful wins for, agricultural professionals here in the United States. But there's also robotic solutions for weeding that combine AI with autonomous vehicles. And it's all so powerful. But of course, and this is where, Wavelengths and ABS kind of steps in here a little bit, and we start to connect the dots a little more. None of that is going to be possible without the proper expansion of and facilitation of proper network solutions, of rural broadband, of connectivity that matches this increasing not only opportunity, but now necessity of these kinds of analytics for agricultural production. So, I want to quickly give our audience some recent developments in rural broadband to set the stage before I ask you this next question. But 2024 is anticipated to be a critical year for the BEAD program, which is the major funding program that's now, helping launch and revitalize existing and new rural broadband infrastructure. Right now, they're focusing on executing states' initial proposals and initiating the challenge process to identify eligible locations for this mass amount of funding. Right now, 16 total states have received approval for that volume 1 of BEAD proposals. So now we have more locations, more determination of community anchors and institutions in each state and territory to deploy these BEAD funds. So things are starting to move. It's exciting. However, I want to get your thoughts. Where is rural broadband right now? So, excluding some of the stuff on the horizon, if you had to make an assessment, where is rural broadband right now in fully supporting these great ag tech innovations that we've been riffing on, right? Is it meeting any of that underlying need? Are things already showing a lot of strain? Give us your assessment.
It is absolutely all over the board. And again, using my farm's example in Missouri, we have fields that are very well covered, and we have fields that are not very well covered. And it may be pieces of the field that are covered well, and pieces of the same field that are not covered very well. So it is inconsistent. One truism that is, we kind of talk about when we get into rural broadband conversations, and you mentioned, getting to those anchor institutions. I fully support that. That is critical. I mean, we've got to help with that rural urban divide. There's all the reasons why we can talk about why that's incredibly important, and that has to happen first. But for precision agriculture to happen, it also has to be wireless in field. You can't really do wireless in field particularly well unless you have that infrastructure in place for those anchor institutions. So that sort of goes without saying. Those things have to go together. But so, I'll kind of dance around your question with the answer, because today the technology matches where the service is. We mentioned there's a lot of edge computing that happens, and that's fine. It serves its purpose, because the technology, we can't take full advantage of all of the artificial intelligence stuff that's available because of the limitations of broadband. But as we also know that technology is rapidly growing, but it may not be fully commercialized just yet. So I think the timing is right to get it on the horizon. So it lives up to its full potential, and that they're happening at the same time. But a couple of things that became very interesting when talking with with experts that were kind of looking at this space, and they were immediately saying, "Well, do farmers want to be able to?" They're thinking anchor institutions and using their own personal example is like, "Can I watch Netflix at my farmhouse?" Like, well, that's cool. I'd love for you to be able to watch Netflix at your farmhouse, but that's not what we're talking about here at all. Sure, a farmer that's driving his tractor, or his tractor's driving itself. Yeah, it's a nice luxury for you to be able to watch Netflix in your tractor while it's going down the road. But we need that parity to be, kind of back and forth. We need that the up speed is as important as the down. The upload is as important as the download. And the other truism that came up was, it's not so much if we were to prioritize what's more important. It's the inconsistency is kind of what causes challenges with the deployment of technology today. So I mentioned, my family's farm may have a field that is perfect in some spots and not perfect in other. And we figured out hardware ways to get around that. Manufacturers have figured out hardware ways to get around that. But the truism that for the deployment of rural broadband, the truism that is true within rural broadband is that technology, the rural broadband needs to be consistent. And the consistency is actually more important than the size of the pipe. So for a tractor to lose connectivity for periods of time while going through the field is not great. In fact, that's a higher priority for it to be consistent than for it to have the ability to stream a whole lot of data all of the time. As we think about for this particular application, those are some of the things that we have to take a look at. And when the deployment of this technology in rural areas, we want to make sure that those needs are met, in addition to the needs of the anchor institutions and the other things we talked about.
Now, with some of the renewed energy then around funding rural broadband expansion and revitalizing even existing rural broadband infrastructure, how hopeful are you then for the current investments, whether we're talking about BEAD or other funding programs or a strategic industry alignment and collaboration? Again, how hopeful are you for some of those current investments actually meeting the growing demands for connectivity-based AgTech solutions? Do things look optimistic, or is there still like, yes, we're making progress, but we're not really addressing this X fundamental aspect that is really necessary? I mean, kind of what's your pulse there?
Well, I think in general, you're not a farmer unless you have a little bit of faith, and you don't have a little
so true,
a little bit
Love
of optimism that seed is going to grow every year. So I have the amount of attention and the amount of funds that are available to support rural broadband and the amount of attention that it's gotten from across the board gives me a lot of hope that this solution will be solved. And I love that it comes from both sides of the aisle. It comes from every interested party, whether they are have a vested interest in the deployment of rural broadband or they're going to be consumer. Everyone is kind of telling the same story. What we do and what I encourage everyone that's in the agriculture space to do is just make sure that we are effectively communicating that our needs are a little bit different. And I'll tell you, every time we talk with folks, whether it's through the FCC or any other government agency that's kind of involved with this, they get it. They maybe have not heard it, but they get it whenever we talk about it. And so our job as the association and other farm groups, their job is to do the same thing we're doing. Tell the story as much as we can. It seems as if based on the questions that I've been getting from folks is our message is getting through. And so that gives me a lot of optimism, a lot of hope that this solution is going to be solved in the near future.
So then let's get into some of the nuances then of meeting this network demand that is increasingly relevant for all slices of the agricultural pie. Considering, again, the varied landscape of agriculture today, right? A small family-owned farm, a large agricultural production, and everything in between. How do you see the expansion of rural broadband potentially leveling some of those playing fields, if at all, in the industry, right? Are there particular technologies that might benefit, a small operation versus a large one differently? Is this going to, again, just kind of be, all ag tech is good ag tech regardless of the size of your operation? What are we talking about?
Well, of course, I represent the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, so I'm going to say all ag tech is good ag tech. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say that. But I would also say that the technology scales. So, again, if you're big farming operation, big family farming operation that's farming several thousand acres, or if you're a small operation that's maybe farming a few hundred acres or less, the technology scales up and down. Now, it has a different payoff. I get that. But as with everything, like options on a car or options on a television, the newest technology starts in on the high end models, but eventually efficiency makes its way down throughout the entire thing. So technology is a great equalizer, and that's proven over and over and over again. Certainly today that it's most available and it's easiest to pay off if you're a larger operation. I mean, that just kind of goes without saying. Because the technology is new, it's getting onto the market, and the pricing models haven't quite been perfected yet. So today it's more available to a larger operation. That's just a truism. But we can look to other segments of agriculture where technology has maybe been a little bit more mature, and we can see that it has been a true equalizer. Let's look to it's easy to talk about row crops because those are fun, but let's talk about dairy. Let's talk about the livestock market. Robotic dairy is similar to a tractor, only it's an installed piece of equipment where a robot essentially has the ability to milk a cow whenever she wants to be milked, and she develops her own schedule. That is life-changing for dairy, and that particular technology scales very well down, and it scales very well up. In fact, a typical robot, dairy milking robot, will work for about 50 to 100 cows. Well, that's a pretty small dairy operation by comparison to some of the other commercial dairy operations that you see. But all of a sudden, what it gives is what might have been a business choice that a farm family couldn't make, because the labor burden is so high to milk cows. You have to be married to it essentially all the time. When that cow milks herself, you can all of a sudden have a life. You can all of a sudden do other things, maybe invest in marketing, maybe come up with a way to find other income streams that make your operation a little bit more efficient. So that's the technology. But then bringing it back to rural broadband and bringing it back to the data piece, when a cow has the ability to milk herself, she's carrying around a beacon that says, this is the feed ration that I'm taking. You all of a sudden can monitor her milk output. You can monitor her feed intake. You can monitor her CO2 emissions because she's a rumen. That's just the diet affects all that. It fundamentally changes the dairy operation for the small farmer as well as for the big farmer. So I get really excited that's a perfect example, but you could say the same thing applies for precision agriculture in the row crop space. Right now, it makes a whole lot of sense for the large acres to put it across a bigger piece of equipment. But when an equipment has the ability to drive itself, and maybe there's not even an operator involved, does that piece of equipment need to be the same size that we're used to seeing? They've gotten big because that was a labor issue. All of a sudden, labor is removed from the situation. You might have pieces of equipment that are significantly smaller. The ripple effect of that is less CO2 emissions, better efficiency, and the ability to scale to all sorts of sizes of acreage. So technology is a great equalizer, and all of this requires good connectivity to live up to its full potential.
Totally. And, I really like that, dairy example because, when we think about the efficiencies that come with AI, let's say, or the deployment of mass IoT nodes and really like getting information and data at the edge. A lot of detractors might say that it creates for an impersonal dynamic now, even though, you get more insight into the granular, relying on that might actually create kind of more distance between the human and the operation. But what I think is unique about that dairy example is that for like the big operation, it actually creates the ability to get more personal with something fundamental to farming, to the culture of farming, which is having a personal relationship with the animals that you work with, and having that kind of granular insight for an operation of dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of dairy cows, let's say, where you can not only better understand when it's time to milk the cow, but also judge kind of their health, their surroundings, with more specificity instead of sort of in a sporadic check-in whenever possible. That allows for a more personal approach with Sally the cow, or Tina the cow. I'm trying to think of random names at this point, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Betsy the cow. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Do you agree with that? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. It's mass customization. I mean, is really what it is it gives you the ability to do that. You can use the dairy cow example because you can put a name on her. You can call her Sally or Tina or Betsy, but again, same technology applies to row crops, and you have plant populations of thousands of seeds per acre. You have that same specificity that you can apply to row crops because of the optics, because of the artificial intelligence, because of the data that we were able to apply and collect. It's that mass customization that makes a really big difference. That's fascinating, isn't it?
100%, 100%. And so now when we talk about, again, the necessity of network solutions and proper network infrastructure to support all of this, what are some of the biggest challenges or barriers that you see today to widespread adoption of AgTech, especially in rural areas? And obviously network connection is one of them, but sort of as an extension of that, what are your thoughts on how stakeholders, whether that's government, industry itself, the communities, kind of work together to address and overcome some of these obstacles to, again, make best use of the AgTech that's already available?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind with that question is really, again, what's the use case for farmers when it comes to rural broadband? Again, they're not streaming Netflix in their field. They're doing real business, and they're doing real business, lots thick layers of data in real time. We're hearing some stories of farmers that were using their hotspots on their cell phone to power their computers. And they were just, within a 24 hours, you run out of your data limits because the data is so thick. So we think about the use case for farmers. I mean, the oftentimes, broadband is paid for by the, by weight, if you will, by the amount of data, and that could quickly become cost prohibitive for a farming operation that's dealing with huge volumes of data. So one thing I do want to say that, kind of my first reaction to the question is what are some of the hurdles we have to overcome is we've got to find an efficient model, or maybe it's a unique business model for the unique use cases of farming operations. Again, I hit my data limits at home every once in a while because I got, 2 kids that are home streaming videos. But that's a very different use than if I'm driving through a field. I could hit that data limit that's applied to me as a consumer almost immediately. So we've got to make sure that is addressed. The other thing is that you have to recognize is that farming is a business. I mean, it's a lifestyle, it's all these other things, but it does have to make economic sense. So that's why we have to address the cost factor. So that'd be point number one, is sort of that unique business model, if you will, for agriculture. And then the second piece is, what I alluded to earlier is really it's that consistency of the pipe being more important than the size of the pipe. So being constant reliability is more important than, being able to pump a bunch of data up and pump a bunch of data down. So those would be the 2 hurdles that I would say have to be overcome first.
Well, Curt, as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to make sure we get a little more insight into, in this larger conversation of involving the right stakeholders and creating the right kind of collaboration across industry to help, farmers and agricultural professionals leverage this great technology for their needs. I'm curious where AEM is playing a role, right? And again, folks, Curt is with the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. And so, Curt, how do you see your organization's role in advocating for some of these policies that support the expansion of rural broadband and therefore the kind of downstream adoption of these advanced agricultural technologies dependent on quality network solutions? What role are y'all playing there, and what kind of conversations are being had across the industry?
Well, one of the things that AEM is particularly good at is our advocacy work, our advocacy and policy work. We've been telling the story of precision agriculture and how dependent it is on rural broadband for about 15 years. So we've been telling this story quite a little bit. In fact, some of the early conversations from the various agencies that are now very much behind rural broadband, we were kind of involved with those early on. So we're kind of proud to see where this has come right now. We've been telling this story, and it seems that it's rewarding to see that it's coming out. But we still got some work to do. So we continue to do that. When we bring our manufacturers together, oftentimes we find when talking with lawmakers, our manufacturers might be the largest employer in their district. Oftentimes they're the largest employer in the district. And so to make that connection to the fact that rural broadband is very important for agriculture, it's good for society, it's good for sustainability, it's good for farmers, all of those types of things. We can tell those stories all day long. But bringing it back to an individual elected official and says, and this equipment's made in your district in central Kansas, and that employs 2,000 people in your district. If rural broadband is successful in that area, that's going to be more jobs, or at least more stable jobs in your areas. So we've been really trying to work towards that particular story from the rural broadband side. The other side we've been taking, and have been very quite aggressive with that, is telling the story of the societal benefits, the environmental benefits of precision agriculture, precision construction, precision dairy, all of these types of stories, and making that connection between, this technology can solve a lot of problems, and it's only the beginning, and it only gets better when connectivity is there. So we tell that story with anyone that will have a chance to tell it to, whether it's a policymaker or a regulator, or even farmer groups to help tell that story. We do that quite regularly. In fact, we've had pretty neat pieces of equipment on the National Mall in Washington D.C. with tractors and combines and bulldozers, excavators, and cotton pickers. We put them all on the National Mall. And what's really fun is telling that story to anyone that will listen, that this is pretty neat equipment, but also it can only get better when rural broadband is available. So we tell that story all day long within AEM, and then we encourage our members and we encourage farmers to be educated so they can tell the story on their own behalf as well.
Yeah, that's such a great takeaway point. I think to close things out on is, as we continue to push for and strategize around the deployment of rural broadband infrastructure and choose the communities, it's important for those that will take advantage of those solutions to be empowered enough to speak on why these are going to be so critical for their operations. And it really is a collaborative effort to make sure everyone feels educated on what is the ideal deployment in this area, right? What are we kind of fighting for? How much upload, download speed? What kind of reliability? What kind of reach? Is that enough? Does that meet my needs? Understand how AgTech can benefit you, and then go to the table and advocate for our community needs X, and here's why. I think that is just such a great point to end things on. So, Curt, thank you so much for your analysis today. I always love these conversations on Wavelengths where we look beyond just the developments in our larger telecom and broadband industries and really look at the downstream, right? The industries that are benefiting from these improvements to our nationwide network infrastructure. So I really appreciate your analysis, and looking forward to more conversations, because again, 2024 is just kind of the beginning of finally seeing BEAD funding deployed. at scale, and it's going to be a protracted process. We're talking years and years here. So that means plenty of more conversations here to chat progress and innovations in AgTech and how they're being supported by network solutions. So folks, thank you again for tuning in to today's episode. We've been chatting with Curt Blade, SVP at the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. He's part of the industry sectors and product leadership team. Curt, if folks want to learn more about the work that AEM is doing in this space, they want to get in touch, they want to be part of the advocacy, education, training, collaboration that y'all are spearheading, how can they do so?
The best place to learn more about AEM is through our website, aem.org. And then to learn specifically about some of the studies that I referenced in this conversation, go to aem.org/insights. And that's where you'll see a ton of resources and data points that we've compiled about the benefits of precision agriculture, precision construction, precision dairy, and really kind of our vision of where this industry is headed. I encourage all of your listeners to visit our website and learn more about the fun things that are on the horizon.
Well, Curt, it was a real pleasure, man. Thank you again for your time today. It was a treat getting to learn from you and hear your insights.
You bet. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you like what you heard and saw today, you want previous episodes, or you want to make sure you don't miss out on future thought-leading conversations here on our podcast hub, well, make sure you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com. Again, amphenolbroadband.com. And make sure you're subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, but likely most chiefly on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. We'll catch you on the next episode of Wavelengths.